Welcome to the Irie Myrie and Friends show. And today we have a very interesting topic to discuss, and we're talking about NIDs, the bill to provide for the National Identification and Registration Authority for a national identification system and connected matters is now ready to be discussed by the public. This is a welcome change in that prior to the enactment of this new law, the public will have a say before the bill becomes law. The bill, which will be discussed at town hall meetings and will be looked at by a bipartisan committee, is referred to as the National Identification and Registration Act 2020 and shall come into operation on a date to be appointed by the minister by order published in the Gazette, and different days may be appointed under this section in respect of different provisions of this act. Today we ask the questions: do we need a national identification system? How the country can benefit from this system? Should it be compulsory? If we are going to implement the system, what should be put in place to secure the data, prevent illicit use of, and also to prevent hackers having access to the databases? Our guests are Samuel Alexander, businessman involved in the gaming and lottery business. We also have Jennifer Housen, a lawyer who specializes in immigration law. We also have Mr. Chung, Dennis Chung, who is an accountant, a business executive, you name it. And we have also Alexander Francis. Uh, Coretta is resolved also with us. She's your normal regular host, Coretta Mathie, and also Colin Myrie, and they will be posing questions to members of the panels. Now, we're going to start out by asking each of you, we're going to spend probably 2 or 3 minutes telling us what you see as the importance of this needs. Is it important or is it not important? Should we implement it or not from the Jamaican perspective? And probably we should ask, let me see, who should we ask? So Jennifer, to start out
All right,
first.
good evening, all. Um, Thank you for inviting me on. And certainly, having been one of the persons who had brought an action against the government in order to ensure that NIDS was constitutional, I am pleased that I'm able here to also give a voice on my own views on this. The fact of the matter is that I believe that an identification system of sorts in any country within this digital age is important. Um, but as it relates to the necessity of it, I think that there needs to be a little bit more. So, yes, I do believe that it is not a bad idea. But as we when we brought the litigation, I believe that it has to be constitutionally sound. Now, I know we're going to go into it later on, looking at predominantly some of the other countries that have been pushing this forward, and we've seen this mostly so in Africa being pushed. I mean, in recent times, we've seen Kenya, for example, bringing this on board. And what we've seen in those countries is this push that if you don't have the ID, you will not get government services. Now, Jamaica is different because, of course, we have the constitution that says that can't happen here. But one of the things I think is crucial in looking at the ID system, and is a concern that has been raised within the African subcontinent, is that is it that the focus is on the ID and not its impact on the people themselves? So as we delve into it a little bit more, there are concerns I have. So for example, there's the ability for a police officer and superintendent to access this. If there is some mess up with your information or it has been given out inadvertently within the act, it doesn't specify what the penalties will be for those controlling the data. And lastly, I am very concerned that the NIDS does not seem at the moment to be working in tandem with the government's new Data Protection Act, which has been passed but has not been enacted. And so I am nervous that it just makes a cursory reference to it by saying, we will ensure that this meets the Data Protection Act or is consistent with it. But then it goes on to set out certain things which are already provided for in the Data Protection Act, but is dealt with differently here. So one, I am concerned about it being a focus on the ID more than the impact it will have on ordinary Jamaicans. Two, I am concerned about the function creep, meaning it is supposed to be there for ID, but what is to stop someone or somebody getting use of this data? And three, the authorities will be responsible for this and in charge of this. What is their liability in the event they don't deal with the data properly?
Thank you, Jennifer. Let's go now to Dennis Chung.
Yeah, thank you, Vernon. I think it needs to be compulsory. I've always felt that way. I think that if you're going to develop your society, you need to have a national identification system. There's no doubt about that. If we're serious about development, because many times we put things in place and we don't do so comprehensively because of the political reason, you know. And therefore, I think that I agree with Jennifer that you need some more teeth in the law. I mean, I read through it. Persons who are responsible for the data. I think that there needs to be some more significant penalties, not just a fine, but imprisonment. There are certain places that I see where they just allow for a fine, and I think imprisonment is needed, if it is breached. I also do not think that the authority should report to a minister. I don't have much confidence in ministers themselves controlling these things. I think that it should be something like the Integrity Commission or the Auditor General's Department, where it reports into Parliament. And when these people are appointed on the board, that they have a tenure, that no one can upset. Once you get to the point of ministers appointing people to boards, then it's possible to have a compromise of the system. But I think it's necessary for it to be compulsory. I'm disappointed that we would sit down as legislators, Parliament, and this is what we come up with. It seems as if the political considerations are more important than the development of the society. And therefore, I would move a lot of those things out. I think that in the act itself, there, it doesn't seem to go deeply enough into certain things. And if I look at, for one example, I look at, Jennifer mentioned the whole thing about the reference to the Data Protection Act, which I agree that needs to be in place, the Data Protection Act. But then you go into under section 24, for example, 24.5, right? That says that if the data is not used for 8 years, then it is wiped clean. 8 years is too long. It encourages inefficiency in the police force and the courts, for example. So these are some of the things that need to be looked at. But as I would say, Vernon, it is necessary, whether we want to have NIDs or whatever we want to call it. At the end of the day, we need something that's going to be compulsory. And, we tried with the TRN, that didn't work. We have NIS, that doesn't work. At some point in time, we expect our parliamentarians to get this thing right and get something to us that works for our development.
Thank you, Dennis. And let's move to Alexander. Last but not least.
Yes, good night, Jamaica. Good night, fellow panelists. I'm certainly happy to be here discussing this topic. I remember when the first NIDS bill was introduced, I remember having some very heated conversations on social media with friends. It was certainly a hot topic for a good 8 months. And boy, I would start out agreeing with Dennis about the compulsory nature. One of the things that really I liked about the first needs bill was the fact that it was compulsory, and it doesn't make any sense for a government to have a population of 2.7 million people and you can't identify so many of the persons. You see so many times. Not to say that this is skewed definitely to law and order, but we see so many times when an officer or a story comes over about a particular individual that is either wanted by the police or somebody just that they're trying to find. And the name of the person is Black Boy or Bulby or Shooter or Shorty. They can only identify that person because by an alias because this person is technically unidentifiable, right? They will not be putting forward any form of identification, and the state has no way to actually find out what is this person's identity. So for me, needs is long overdue. As Dennis said, we've gone through a couple of them. And if you notice, the most successful one of all of them was the electoral ID, and that is the one that has the biometrics and all these things with it. So I was very, very disappointed, and I still do not understand the action of, unfortunately, the opposition when they challenged it, because to my understanding, no, the opposition was not opposed to the compulsory nature of the law, and yet the unconstitutional ruling came down more so on that matter of the compulsory nature of it, as well as for kids, persons under the age of 18 years. So for me, this is long overdue. I see no reason why when a child is born, they shouldn't be given their unique number. You're part of the Jamaican family and you're given this number. Not only that, I had a case, a relative of mine the other day. He's attending school, and uh, luckily, there were two of them. Luckily, one of them had a passport and they needed to open a bank account. The other one didn't have one. And of course, the banks will not allow, I would not use a school identification card as sufficient identification to open a bank account. So a lot of persons, and if we want to move towards digitizing the society and having that whole matter of financial inclusion and stuff like that, we should be encouraging youngsters having bank accounts from early. And at this point, a lot of Jamaicans, a lot of persons in that age group, say 12 to 15 years, would have difficulty. You're just leaving school, you do not have a passport, you cannot open a bank account.
All right, let me just clarify something before we continue. The compulsory nature of it, that's a constitutional matter that has been dealt with in the court. So if you need that to be changed, you have to change the constitution. Can I see counsel here?
Yes. Thanks, Alexander. You know, I want to say something first and foremost to Vernon. Alexander, Dennis, Irie Myrie, let's just make something clear. I sit in this seat tonight as Jennifer Housen, attorney at law, Jamaica, barrister at law, England and Wales, attorney at law, New York, State Supreme Court. I sit and of the Third Judicial Department. I sit here as a lawyer. In Jamaica, we need to stop seeing this orange and green foolishness, all right? Even though it was brought by the opposition. So I need to get that clear. I don't sit here as PNP right now. I'm always intrigued when I used to do criminal law at the very start of my legal life. I used to always be intrigued by the people who would cuss about, why, you know, lawyer, them make the thief, them get off. And they are the first ones to be at the doorstep as the parents of persons are saying, my son never do it. Until it visits your doorstep. It's kind of like the people who say, Well, if you don't have nothing to hide, where you're not going out. No, it doesn't work like that. And Vernon
All right.
introduced me.
I
One
think
minute.
Jennifer,
As
I
an
think we got the point, Jennifer.
Right.
I think
As
the
an
point we're trying to
immigration.
get know that it is a constitutional matter. If we want to go that route, then the constitution would have to be changed.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's
Could I-
spend
what I
some
want-
time. Hold for me, hold. Let's
could I-
spend some time, you see, looking at why. I want us to get down to some more details as to why do we think the needs is necessary or it is not necessary.
Well,
Could I-
Vernon, 1 minute,
All right,
Alex, and
hold for
I'm
me.
not finished. What
Okay,
I'm saying is, we already have systems. We have a driving license system. We have an electoral ID system. We have an NI system. Here's my point. Why aren't we consolidating what we have,
That's exactly-
build on that, and digitizing that? Why are we borrowing $8 billion to create an ID system? We've
All right,
used
Jennifer,
Karen.
Jennifer, I don't want to go down that road, but I can tell you the IT person that I've consulted with. Each of these systems, they have defects in them. As you already know, the electoral system came to being because you didn't have any numbering system. Then you had the TRN because of the tax purposes. Then you have the license. So you have separate things. I wouldn't call them systems. So that's a different discussion. What I want to look at now is the need for a needs. Is there a need for it or not?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Right. Okay. So, all right. And I was getting. I think I went through a couple of the reasons why I think we needed needs. The next one is a lot of, with probably the exception of the voters ID, which is another ID that it's a pretty good ID, but with the exception, you have the driver's license situation is absolutely ridiculous. You can't depend on a driver's license because it's heavily faked and copied. Right?
We have to give you some direction here. We are moving out of, remember I said to you, we have to keep it concise. We are moving out. Hold for me. No. I want you to stick to the topic general that I'm putting to you now.
Yes.
We're not discussing national ID in terms of driver's license. What we need to look at the need for a national ID or we don't need it. So let us stick to that point.
Which is exactly my point. I'm saying the forms of identification that we have today has proven to be insufficient and they're not reliable. That is why I was applying for a loan just not too long ago, and a lot of persons have the same problem. You go to a bank now or some institutions, they're asking you for 2 IDs. Some are asking you for 3 because they do not trust any single one of the identification systems or cards that we have.
Okay, so basically what you're saying then is that, hold for me, I want us to make our points very concise. So what you're saying then is that we do have no proper national identification system and there's need for one.
Exactly.
Okay, Dennis and the others, no, we got the point already. We don't want to belabor that point. Other members, no man, you're going to hold it there. Dennis, you want to come in here?
Yeah, I think it's necessary because, as Alexander said, the other ones are inadequate. The fact of the matter is that, we don't have a national ID system now. You can choose to register to vote or not. You can choose to have a driver's license or not. You can choose to pay tax or not. And therefore, you don't have to have those IDs. But what we need to have is a national identification system where everyone is on it. And we need to fix what's there because, it's just like the ticketing system. It don't work. So, we need to put things in place that work because the truth is that the cost of not doing it is going to be significant. We're not going to be able to control things like social security properly. We're not going to be able to control things like crime, so it's very
But
necessary.
Dennis, what I want you to, when you speak specifically, rather I say we'll be able to control crime, I want you to give us examples. Take, for example, the ticketing system. If you had one, I can tell if you had one ID, then it means therefore if somebody owes a ticket, they can't go and they can't do certain things with government until the ticket is paid for. So I want us to be very specific in terms of the benefits. I don't want us to be too general.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, if you have one ID that you can recognize the person by, then it means that you can work across various government departments. As I said, you have a ticket outstanding, it means that, you know, you can get held somewhere else. You know, so it's a way of accounting. I mean, just think about a company, for example. You work in a large company, and if no one has an ID, or you can choose to have an ID, you know, how do you recognize people? And it's just a practical approach, you know. And I hear you that the Constitution says that it's not like that, but you know, we have to move with the times. You know, we're moving into a digital age. And the truth is that if we want to develop the country, then that's how we have to go, you know, because we have to have one way of identifying people across the board. You know, we can't say that we're asking for a TRN and, you know, someone might not have it. We have a situation now where many people don't have IDs. Many people don't have bank accounts, you know, and because of that. So how do we move towards digitizing the society? How do we move to controlling the population as it grows? How do we move to ensuring that social services, you know, are adequately and fairly distributed? The only way that we can do that is if we know the citizens who are in the country, you know, and we cannot know the citizens who are in the country unless we have a central database that we can control them by.
Could I show this without the lawyer? That in Jamaica, one can vote and you're not a citizen, nor even a citizen of the Commonwealth country, of any Commonwealth country. You're aware of that, Jennifer?
I'm sorry, say that again, Vernon.
That someone can vote in Jamaica and you're not a citizen of this country, nor are you a citizen of any Commonwealth country.
I'm not aware of that.
Any of you, Mr. Alexander, you are aware? You know how you register somebody to vote?
Yes, I know the process, but I didn't. As far as I know, you have to either, I think you have to reside in the country for a certain period of time, and you have to be a citizen. I wasn't aware of that.
No, I'm telling you you're wrong on that one. You are not required to produce your birth certificate or anything. All happens is that if the political party say you live, if I'm wrong, I would love somebody to correct me. You're not required to show any birth certificate so long as you live in the area, and both those, the JLP paper, whichever party, so long as they're delegates or whoever, scrutineers, whatever you call them, accept that you are a citizen, then you are put on the voters list. It's not much with the RGD to ensure that you're a citizen. I'm sure
no,
right.
Vernon, you have to be careful. And I mean, now I'm going into politics and from a personal experience. I mean, no, because I didn't understand the question.
Yes.
I thought you were saying somebody who is not a citizen or a Commonwealth citizen, because the law says a citizen or a Commonwealth citizen can vote, right? But you're actually saying a person with no ID. So I think now I understand what you're saying, but the reality is your first port of call is to go to the EOJ with your birth certificate, right? That's what has to happen. The birth, so it's not to do with a scrutineer or the JLP or the PNP. It's not the JLP scrutineer or the PNP scrutineer. You go with your birth. Sorry, Alex, you're saying something?
No, go ahead.
Right, you go with your birth certificate. The EOJ confirms it initially. Then, to confirm where you live, both a JLP scrutineer and a PNP scrutineer and an EOJ officer turns up. So we have to be careful of our information.
Now, I'm going to ask you all to do research, because I'm telling you, if somebody many Jamaicans do not even have birth certificates and they do vote.
Yeah.
Mr. Alexander, you ought to know that. You're in the field.
Yes, but it may be illegal, Vernon, but I think what you're saying is that you're saying the politicians, JLP, PNP, are facilitating this.
No, that's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying, I'll put it to you guys. So if you can prove to me that it is not, so I'll be happy. I'm only putting it to you that a significant amount of Jamaicans are not registered. They're registered as voters. There's no verification to see that that person is actually a citizen of this country. Now, we probably won't be able to do that here, but I'm going to suggest that members of the panel look into that one, because that's an open.
Well, Vernon,
Yes.
I want to say to you that I mean, it's the first time I hear it, but I don't find it difficult to believe because I have never been verified. People visited the house where I was living, and they put me on the list. I have never gone to the EOG and been verified.
That's the point I'm making. And the point I'm making, I'm surprised that you guys don't realize that. The point I'm making, I should be doing this as the host. I was trying to throw it out to you so we have a wider discussion. That even the voter's card, and you also know that for the driver's license, now in recent times, they have been using the TRN to link it. But there are persons who use one name and they are registered in a different name. And it was when they started to
It's very
computerize
possible.
the system that they realized that there was this challenge.
But
But
Vernon,
I was trying
it's
to
not
explain to you all that so far we have not had a proper system. So in
No, but
terms of
hang on,
putting it,
Vernon, the system is there. The fact that it is breached does not mean that those who should be ensuring the system, that's the point I am trying to make, It's as if you guys are saying, we don't have a national ID system. That's not true. We have one. It's called the voters ID system. It has a flaw in that just what you and Dennis have raised is right. I personally also know.
Yeah, but Jennifer, we don't have a national ID system.
No, hang on a minute.
No, but
Oh,
Jennifer,
could I interrupt and tell you there? Could I tell you there that as far as I know in other countries and generally, a driver's license is not seen as a national identification.
I'm not speaking of the driver's license though.
Eh?
Yeah, but the voter's ID wouldn't be national ID too because it's only for people over 18.
Yes, it's not.
Right, I understand that.
Want to vote.
Yeah.
Could I say something as well? Could I say something?
Yeah, good.
There's a part of the system that we're overlooking as well, and this is where this system would actually do significant damage to fraudsters. There's a part of NIDs that will allow for verification of a voter ID card, which even makes it better than a voter's ID. You walk into an institution, there are going to be institutions, right, that would have a portal set to the national database. I walk in and I present my card. I don't know if you just made that card down the road. Your number is on that card. That institution can now run that card number, and that number will come back with your basic information, your photo ID, and probably other information based on how it is set up. And that to me would be a game changer because you can fraud the IDs you want to fraud.
But I throw another one at you because I'm going to rub you all because you're not being as specific as I'd like you to be, and you're allowing me to be getting involved. Let me give an example. In other countries, hold for me, in other countries, you have what is called an e-verification system. So if you go to the United States or Canada, for example, to seek employment, the employer is required to use that system. Some might not, and they'd have to employ you off the payroll. In this country, somebody can come from Cuba, America, Canada, and work, and they are not required to be verified. And there's no system that an employer can verify if the person is a Jamaican or not.
It will take care of that.
So that's where I want you guys to go in, but you're not going there. You're allowing me to get too far.
But that's the point. That's the point I made, and I think Alexander made it, Vernon, that in order for us to ensure an efficient system across government, across the country, you have to have a compulsory system because I like the arguments that you put forward, Vernon, because all we've been talking about just now is showing us why we need a compulsory ID system.
Exactly.
So that when somebody is born, they have to have a unique ID system because the truth is that what we have now is totally inadequate and too many things are falling through the cracks.
And you know what concerns me is that you guys keep saying like this is the sort of utopian ideal. This will solve our problems. And you know something? You are wrong. And I'll say why you're wrong. It is a good idea. Yes, I agree with you, gentlemen. But if you actually sit there and actually believe that we are going to have a system, that the system is going to run without the faults that are without the faults that we currently have, That's what I'm concerned about. So you say, oh, it will take care of this. It will. No, it won't. Until we fix, for example, please let me finish here. For example, the Act provides for an authority, right? It provides for a regulatory authority. Dennis mentioned something earlier about the 8 years for Section 24. What he did not flesh out was that Section 24 provides that the authority cannot divulge information except in certain circumstances, which is if a superintendent asks for that information. But even after they do that, they have 8 years to then take it up, which he says is long. So my point is that when you look at the act and the authority that is to be in charge of this, the efficiency starts from there. So if we're inefficient in EOJ, we're inefficient at the driver's license authority, we're inefficient to check if somebody, please let me finish, have an ID. Because when you go to vote, they have a black book and they have your fingerprints there. If you're that all of those systems are being breached and it's going to be fantastic by having the single ID, then we fool ourselves.
Good.
No,
At this point, I want to
I-
welcome MP Julian J. Robinson. Mr. Robinson,
Good night.
you're here.
No
We're going to allow you to probably speak at this point. We've been looking at the need. We're not looking at what has happened so far, but we're looking at the need for NIDs, or if we don't need it at all. And if we're going to have these NIDs, what is the role of NIDs? And we have looked at, for example, some persons have said that it ought to be compulsory. Because just the same way if you are born, you are registered, then you need to be assigned a unique number. There's questions as to whether driver's license a system, whether they could put all of them together, driver's license, TRN, and make into one system. Why is the need for NIDs? Now, I'm going to ask you at this point, is NIDs important? And if so, if not, why not? And if so, how do you think it ought to be implemented?
Well, without a doubt, it's important, and I believe there's definitely a need for a national identification card. I think there are too many Jamaicans and I think what COVID has demonstrated, we were forced to move to electronic or more digital forms of not just communication, but paying out some of the benefits. There's a need to identify persons and in a way that doesn't require you to go to find them physically. So from our perspective, and as a party, we are supportive of the need for a national ID. And we've been through a number of iterations in terms of NIDs and where we are. So we are supportive, and I believe it's necessary. The issue of compulsory, that was dealt with by the court's ruling last year. And, it is not compulsory, but I do believe there are ways that the government can incentivize persons to use the card. And, whether it is going to be tied to, for example, financial institutions may make it a requirement if you're going to do business with them that you need to have a NIDS, or, other ways. And, if you take the TRN, is the TRN compulsory? No, but if you're going to do business with the government, you need to have a TRN. I don't know what they plan to do, but I believe there are many ways in which you can incentivize and encourage people to come on board.
Julian, let me put this question to you. If we know it's against the Constitution, if you're going to implement the system and it's going to be compulsory, then you can't just implement it like that. You have to change the Constitution because that law will become null and void. But the question is, since you are required under law to register births and also deaths, why is the NIDS separate and apart from the RGD? Why is not part and parcel of the same thing? The only difference that there will be additional information such as biometric information.
You mean, why is it not compulsory? That's what you're asking?
Good. I'm asking the question against the RGD where you are required, every child is required to be registered at birth. Now I'm saying the probably only difference with NIDS is that's a new system and that biometric information will be required. And I'm saying, why is it not also necessary to have NIDS done at birth so it becomes compulsory, just like the registration of births and deaths? In any case, if somebody dies, you'd have to register them too.
Again, I wouldn't want to go back through what the court found in terms of that, and the level of information and people being forced to, and the penalties
No,
which
that's
were
what I'm
criminal
asking
for
you, sir.
persons who.
What I'm saying, you are right. The court has made a ruling. Now I'm looking at generally to look at it because we might have to look at changing the constitution. So I'm looking from that point of view.
But I wouldn't,
What do you
my
think?
point is, I don't know if you need, I'm saying, I don't think you need to go there. I think there are
Okay.
ways in which you can
I can do it. Okay.
provide an incentive that people will want to have a card. If
Okay.
you demonstrate that there's a benefit in having a NIDS, as I said, if you take the de facto national ID right now is your voter's ID. There are people who do it because they want to vote. There are a lot of people who do it because it's free and they need to have an ID if they're going to go change a check at the bank or if they're going to do any business with financial institutions. I know the financial institutions feel very strongly about the need for an ID. They may say, listen, you need to have 2 forms of ID. Suppose somebody don't want to get a passport, it may be the need. So I believe government can find very easy ways to put in place a NIDS, which is not compulsory, but which incentivizes a large part of the population to want to have a card without having to change the constitution at all.
I want you to continue to let us look at the benefits of NIDS. Persons have mentioned, for example, so Alexander, you can remind us. Oh yes, we mentioned one thing. You'll be a good person to help to clarify that. I'd put it to the panelists that a person can get on the voters list and that person is not a citizen of this country nor a citizen of any Commonwealth country. Are you aware of that, sir?
Yeah, that is possible because when you go to register, the level of verification that is done at a electoral office, it is possible that somebody can indicate I've been resident in the country for 6-9 months and get on the list. They don't necessarily ask you for proof of those things. If they believe they have a reason, they can. But I'd say 95% of the cases, when people are registered, the only query that people check is that you're of the age. If you are not, then they ask you for a birth certificate and then they verify you at your home address. So it is very possible that people slip through that loop.
That is why I was making the point that it would not be wise to combine any existing system. You have to start from scratch. And also,
I don't. Where I think there's a possibility
yes,
of synergies is that, in a sense, when you look at what is being required of the new NIDS card, it's the same thing for the EOJ card. And I think, we have invested a lot in terms of the infrastructure of producing EOJ IDs. I believe that infrastructure is something that could be built on to expand it to clearly persons who are under the age of 18 and to use what you have developed with the EOJ for NIDS. So I'm not of the view that you have to start from scratch and you already have the RGD, which produces these with persons at birth and death. Now the RGD is being incorporated, but I haven't heard anything about the EOJ
but that's an important point. Yes, we have not heard about that at all.
Yeah, two things.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I want to touch on that.
Yes, Alexander.
That RGD is being incorporated, and my understanding now is that it would be required that a part of your birth certificate would also be that unique national identification number that will now become a part of your birth record, right? At birth. That is my understanding of it. The other thing about the EOJ system, why my understanding that they would not use the EOJ system is that it is in some way a little bit, call it outdated. They would essentially, to actually go back to use that type of a database technology would actually be more a problem than actually bringing us forward. So it's easier for them to incorporate rather than build on the EOJ system at this point.
Because some people don't have an IT person here.
I've never heard that reasoning proffered. I would say by and large, the EOJ has maintained the database without, you hear rumors and you hear allegations, but without any major breach of security of the 1.9 electors who they have a lot of information on. And, there are continuous ways of improving it. But I would tell you, I think what is also a significant driver is that, we got a loan from the IDB to pursue this and to pursue it in a particular way. And I think that more than any other explanation is probably why it is being done the way it is being done.
Well, I just want to put it here. It's a pitch. We don't have an IT person here, but I will tell you with my knowledge of IT, that is not it's a simple matter of taking one IT system and place into another.
But
Um,
Vernon, I think you said it correctly. You're not, and I'm not in any way being rude. You're not an IT person.
no, man,
I
you're not.
think-
No,
Right, and I think that what Julian says, it makes, well, I don't want to say makes sense. It's obviously, if you work it through logically, if you've already got a system with 1.9 million, and as you guys had said earlier, we know it starts with 18-year-olds, right? Which means that the under 18s is what needs to then be fed into this. And we're saying if this is already there, then it ought not to be a quantum leap. And I don't want somebody saying, oh, what this system, listen, again, you're not an IT person, I'm not an IT person.
I must hold for me, Jennifer. Jennifer, hold for me. Hold for me, Jennifer. Jennifer, no, man, hold. No, Jennifer, hold on, Jennifer.
Let me just finish.
Hold on, Jennifer. I didn't. Jennifer, please respect the chair. Thank you. Now, I was just going to continue. I listened to her, Jennifer. I listened to you, but that was not the real point I was going to. I was just going to make a point and say we really need an IT person. I was only putting it to you all that it is not as easy as that. But because we don't have an IT person, I must tell you that I have had 10 years in the IT field. I'm only giving you from my experience, but I'm not qualified in it. And I'm saying to you that we do not have an IT person, so we cannot go into in-depth discussion. It is very clear to me that so far we have not heard the IT person speak up on this issue, and we really need to have them. So that's enough I say on that IT issue. Moving forward, back to you, Jennifer.
Sorry, yes, Vernon. I heard you. I was simply saying that if there is an infrastructure already, and at the risk of being repetitive, then what we were saying earlier, and I've lost my train of thought now. The fact and that's what I was saying, I was nearly finished. But the point I was making was that if it's there already, why are we reinventing the wheel? We keep saying over and over, yes, but a brand new system. And as I say, it is not going to be the
Yeah. The point I was making is, you know, an IT person, clarify. We're going to move on from that one. Go ahead, Samuel.
How do we get the dead people off the out of the electoral?
No, you tell us for the ID. You tell us, how do you do that with a national ID system?
To me, it's I would not discount that suggestion. But to me, if we really remember now, this we're kind of limiting this whole thing to NIDs. Remember this whole effort, that $8 million is not entirely to build out the NIDs infrastructure. It is to digitize government. So from a lot of the records that we have in government will be digitized through this. The websites are supposed to be improved and made more secure. It's a matter of trying to get the government into the 21st century to be going off digital information rather than paper. It should extend it's going to be extending to health as far as I'm concerned as well. We could end up with digital records at health and that sort of thing. I think so.
Let's start, but let me just answer your question.
Needs.
Let me just answer the question. You asked how, and I just think it's important. I mean, I've made the point about the EOJ, and I believe there are opportunities for synergy. You know, how you get dead people off the list, the EOJ has a process. They work with the RGD's department, not perfect, it's not automated, to find the names. They work with the local electoral offices. So for example, I can go to my EOJ office and indicate that John Brown has died. I might provide a funeral program or something. Somebody goes out there to verify that that information is indeed correct. So I'm just saying there is a process that exists. And the only point I'm making is, at the end of the day, and I know a significant part of the loan funds are devoted to doing other activities that are non-NIDs. My point is, a $68 million US loan, I believe you can get a national ID without utilizing so much funds. And I obviously have to be concerned about it because maybe my children and grandchildren will be the ones paying back the loan. That's the only point.
Committee
Vernon.
panelists, I am not hearing you being very direct. So for example,
Vernon.
Julian mentioned about getting dead people off. No, I expect you guys to say you need a system which operates real time, so that if you have a NID system and if somebody dies, the moment you go and you register that death, then that person would automatically come off the electoral system. I'm not hearing my committee panels touching that.
Vernon, can I say something?
Do stuff like that.
Who do I get? Samuel, who go first? Samuel?
I guess Dennis can go, but I'll just say quickly, some of the $8 billion is, in my opinion, is actually to put in the infrastructure to the things like that, to have digital reporting rather than paper trail reporting, where you can simply record a death from a funeral home or from X place with the verification just like that, rather than having to go through this long process at RGD or the tax office.
Yeah, Vernon.
Yes, Dennis.
I mean, I've listened to the comments, and I think this is why we can't get anywhere in the country. But I agree with most of what Samuel has said and what you have said. We can't solve the problem of how it is implemented here, right? And I agree that it is much more than just putting in an infrastructure, and it is very difficult to change an infrastructure that is not working. Right? My experience, it is very, very difficult. I mean, it's not just the cost of it, but also the timing of doing it. It would be very, very difficult to take something like that.
Dennis, if I can help you with that, I think you're talking about the architecture, the structure of the database, the conversion of database.
Yeah, man. I know a little about IT, right? I actually, IT comes under me, right? And I can tell you, and you should know, Vernon, it don't work like that, especially if you have outdated code that is not supported.
That's it, right? Exactly. Outdated code, you have to, yes. Right. I don't want to go into details. I do know enough because I worked in the field for 10 years as a program analyst.
I think what's important for us to get and understand is that based on what we're seeing, Vernon, we do have a need for a compulsory system of recognizing our people. As I said, I can't imagine my company saying to people when they come in, you have an option to have an ID or not, right? We would have some serious problems, right?
But you will also have a problem, Mr. Chung. The law also stipulates that you can come out of the system at any time.
I know
that's
that.
a very serious matter.
I'm speaking first about what needs to happen, right? And I think that is how we have to approach the problem. We have to say, listen, guys, this is what needs to happen, right? And we have to work from that. So the way to solve a problem is you start with what you want first, and then you work back from there. And then we have to look at it and say, okay, is it worth it to go this route or that route, right? Based on the fact that if we don't have this thing in place, I can tell you it is going to stymie our development as a country, right? We are not going to be able to progress. And all those other things that have been put in place, right? TRN, EOJ, whatever it is, it has not worked, right? And I agree also with the point Jennifer made that the act, I'm not looking at how the act is now. It has to change. There are some fundamental things in there that needs to change if it's going to work, right? But let us start from the point that this thing must be in place if we're going to move this country forward, right? And I can tell you, I'm speaking from a personal point of view. I don't have much confidence in just Parliament looking at this and solving it, because they haven't been able to solve anything in the past before, right? But I'm saying we need a system like this in place. Let's start with that problem, which is what we need to do. And we need to work back and say, okay, how do we resolve these things, right? Because we can't move this country forward if we don't have that. Listen, I mean, we can't, it is very difficult to incentivize people. Come on. You realize the amount of people who don't have a bank account in this country? right? You realize the amount of people who are not on the voters list. What's the voter turnout? Right? You realize the amount of people who do not have a TRN, or the amount of people who have multiple TRNs.
But can we say though, can I interject here and say this? And again, I don't wish for you to guys to think, oh, I'm sitting here and I'm going against this. Not at all. But Alexander said something, and I think I must correct him there. Because you mentioned something about the monies and said, oh, I think some of it is for this. And whether you're speaking off the top of your head or you have personal knowledge, one thing I will raise now, by the time that the matter was in court and just before the decision had been promulgated, 1.36 million US dollars had been spent on advertising. Advertising, not advertising to educate, just advertising in newspaper, 1.36. So once I understand that you're saying that some of the money is for other things and so on, I can sit here and tell you that the 68 million was for the NIDs, and whether that is sufficient for other places. But one of the things that, as I said earlier, the authority that is to be put in place to oversee stuff, I think one of the things we really need to do is to ensure we're auditing how this approach to that, to getting a NIDS on board is dealt with, because we may find that we get to $68 million US later, and we might still have to be borrowing more. And I just think it is something that if we're not going to be good stewards of this money at the beginning, we might not end up being good stewards of trying to implement this.
And the point taken.
Does it include our biometrics and everything like that?
Pardon?
Biometrics. Will
Yes.
that have to be mandatory?
Yes.
What you mean, the 1.3? What the?
He's asking what is included in NIDS. What information you'll need from NIDS? Your photo ID, your biometrics, manual signature, address, your address and date of birth and stuff.
Well, but if you decide to enroll, you have to give your. It is pretty much the same things that were in the one that was struck down. So everything that Alexander says, but also, so if I choose to voluntarily enroll, I would need to give my spouse's details, my address, any other address that I have, my mother's name, my father's name, that is included as well. So in the new act, I mean, it is being fairly comprehensive. I don't know if it's too early to make this point here, Vernon, and I know you had mentioned it before about moving on. But one of the concerns that I know you said I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm actually a human rights lawyer, which immigration is only a part of. But one of the things, when we look at the Ivory Coast and Senegal, which have introduced this with using monies from the EU, is that an organization called Privacy International found out that the safeguards of the system were so poor that inadvertently the information that was in there was being able to be used by the EU for deportation of Senegalese and people from the Ivory Coast from the EU. So I think one of the things we have to make sure is that the Data Protection Act, that the NIDS, becomes consistent with the Data Protection Act. The safeguards are there. The Information Commissioner that is raised in the Data Protection Act, that a place is made for them in the NIDS, because otherwise we could inadvertently be compromising our own citizens if our overseas partners like the US, the Canada, and the UK starts asking for access to that database.
Well, just reading the bill here, the bill that I read, unless there's some clause that I didn't see, but the bill that I read does not allow for disclosure of any information within that database to any third
That's
party.
incorrect. If you look at section, section 24.
The Commissioner of Police can, under certain circumstances.
Yes,
as well as national security.
Yeah, national.
Any
Yeah, but they have to get an order from the court.
Hold for me. You have to get an order from the court, and the police, the police, as far as I know, overseas entity, as far as I know, can have that.
No, they can't. But I think the point was, I don't know that it was done legally. I think the issue is they ensuring that you have the safeguards, that it's not abused, and that you don't have unauthorized disclosure of information.
It doesn't discount the point that Jennifer makes, though. I think it needs to be much tighter. It needs to be much tighter along with the Data Protection Act. The persons who are responsible for the data, I think there needs to be a lot more stiffer penalties.
$3 million.
They need to face prison time too. They need to face some prison time to not just pay a fine.
There are some remedies in there. I saw there's a general remedies section that made
no, but when they speak to specific offenses relating to these people, they don't mention the prison thing. They need to go to prison too if they disclose certain information. You know, so I mean, I think the act is a good start, but it needs to tighten up a little more.
Dennis, is the matter of paying the fine and continue as usual?
Yeah, it just say a fine. I mean, there are certain sections, I made note of it here. I plan to do a submission. It just said pay a fine, which in certain places, I think they need to have a imprisonment part in there too, because I mean, Dennis, when you have people's data that you're playing with, you can't.
Dennis, let me give you. I have to hold from. Let me give Dennis trouble now. So who's going to pay for the incarceration to feed them and clothe them? Who will pay for that?
No, but sorry, hang on.
I'd love to give it. Let me just. I'd love to give him some trouble. Dennis, who will pay for that?
I'm asking because I'm confused with what Dennis is saying. See, there are penalties for persons. So, like me, for example, I might, if I mess around with data or whatever, right? There's a $2 million fine. But the thing is, if the government, not the government, if the authority negligently, inadvertently, advertently, recklessly deals with your information, I am not seeing any penalties as against them. So that's where, Dennis, I wasn't sure if you were talking about persons who, for example, hacking the system or give false info.
I'm talking more about the authority. Those are the persons I'm talking about more.
But there's nothing in there against them. I didn't tell me where it is. I thought it was everybody else.
And that's why I'm saying that we need something in there.
Oh, by the way, panelists, I hate us to get bogged down into the specifics of the law. Really, I want you, by your experience, to tell us what ought to be there, because Dennis already made a valuable point that that body should not be answerable to a political leader. And I think that's a very important point. If it's not answerable to a political leader, then it means, therefore, no government would have that right to authorize the release of any information. Any information would have to be released based upon the law, based upon a commission which is set up under some commission of parliament. Am I correct, Dennis?
Yeah, that's the point, because it speaks to the minister. I don't think that this should be answerable to the minister. Right. It should be to Parliament. You know, just like the Auditor General, just like the Integrity Commission, it needs to go to Parliament, and there needs to be a time which, once you appoint them, you can't move them. You know, you appoint them, they're there for 7 years, and you can't do anything between that time.
Unless, of course, due to mental instability or some kind of
or some flagrant breach.
Yes.
You know, and Parliament would have to address it at the time, not a minister.
I think we have a few minutes left. You know, what I want us to do, is not to constrain ourselves to what was there before the new law, because I've looked at the law myself, and that's why I want you guys to come up with your creativity. Dennis and Jennifer, you have mentioned some points already. When I mentioned the one about the electoral registering persons who are not Jamaicans, I know that shocked you all. Now, if we look at systems rather than looking generally and be creative, we will see what is not there. And I'm telling you, if you look at what we have, then that will restrict our minds. Dennis made a point which I love. We must first look at what we want first. Then we need to, how do we get there? And how we're going to get there. And I think that's the main thing. For example, the people of this country, I don't think they have been sold on the idea as to why we need these NIDs. They haven't.
No, I beg to differ on that. I think we're underestimating the Jamaican people in that regard. Because for the most part, if I've spoken to 50 persons, I would say 40 out of the 50 are
You
in
clearly don't move in the same circles, Alex. If I speak to 50, I get 49 who say they don't want it.
I've not gotten that. I got a lot of persons that I've spoken to are in support of NIDs.
Mr. Alexander, let me help you there again. Mr. Alexander, let me help you. The question is not whether they understand it or not. The question is, as Mr. Dennis Chung said, we need to know where we want to go. The point I'm making, if it was sold to the people as to where we want to go, probably would not end up with so much controversy. So that's the point I want you to deal with. In terms of selling this thing, have we marketed in terms of where we want to go?
I don't think we got a chance to properly do that. Whatever we got, and then came the action. So I don't.
No, please,
Alex,
no. With all due respect,
don't do that, Alex.
with all due respect. I mean,
there was an effort by there was a genuine effort by the government
to do what?
A lot of seminars. They went around the country and they held.
Yes, it was illegal. Let me
just say this.
All right, let me come in and protect him. But in trying to protect you, I have to be very fair as a judge here. I don't think I can agree with you on that one. And I must all tell you, I've been on this thing for probably over 30 odd years. When on radio, when I started to push this thing and said to government that we need to go there and talk to the people, that was not then. What we saw was an announcement, and then we heard that it was going to be discussed in Parliament, and then it became very political. The moment something like this becomes political, you are going to have a problem. If it was sold to the people, it could not have been so political.
Vernon, I agree with you. I was at the PSOJ at the time, and that was one of the criticisms I had of it. It was not sold to the people properly. I do not think it was marketed properly to the people. And told them why we needed it. There was a lot of noise about it, but the truth is that the substance was very low.
We're in a good space now, I think. And that space is, here we are, we're talking about it. When it was actually passed, the opposition had come in that day, and all they were asking for was for it to go to a JC. We are here now. We are here, we are stakeholders.
Jennifer,
an input.
Careful to use that word, Jennifer. It passed quite a number of persons. That's what it passed us.
Sorry, a joint select committee. My apologies. We're both, all we're asking for, let's have a discussion. It's going to affect us so bad. Let's talk about it. So again, it wasn't to say no. It was let's, just as we're doing now. And I think we've all said, one, yes, it's a good thing. Two, we're saying incentivize it. But it can't just be I want it compulsory and it don't make sense otherwise. No, unfortunately, our constitution doesn't allow for that. So let's work together with something that is going to be workable and legal and can help the country, as Dennis says, for the development of the country. And it doesn't matter who is in power, who gets in power. This is something that, yes, in the US, the Social Security works very, very well. In the United Kingdom, your similar, the equivalent of the Social Security there, like our TRN, also works. Unfortunately, in Jamaica, the TRN, which is supposed to have done what a national ID is supposed to have done, hasn't. So in England, the NIS is given at birth. It is now, it's given at birth. So it holds the person to that. And so I'm saying that if we can get something workable, legal, and that will develop the country, I don't think that we are all far removed from the same thing, wanting the same thing.
Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit offline here, Mister. Just a little bit off.
Yes, Colin.
Yeah, is this a system now? This one is more like for Mr. Alexander, where the government will be tracking somebody from say 6 years old, the school coming up. So he will know from 6 years old to maybe say 20, if that person is an engineer, an accountant, or whatever. So if somebody, say in the US, wants an accountant, the government can look at Mr. Alexander and say, okay, this is what he's trained for, and recommend Mr. Alexander to that firm, you know, and would that be a disadvantage to people who are not that educated and all those things and getting jobs and all things, and isn't like it's a control, you know, of people knowing exactly where, you know, what you are, you know, your profession and all of those things.
All right, Colin.
Yeah.
No, I don't think you have to be worried about that. I mean, but yes, the plan is to have this system of identification tracking a Jamaican citizen from birth. You'll be given what is called the NIN, which is your national identification number, and it will be linked to your national identification profile. The understanding I got from the bill is I think you will have to re-verify your information. I think it's every 5 years, I think, if I remember, when you're under 18. And after 18, I think it moves to every 10 years.
10 years.
Right. Oh, yes. It changes after a while.
Or 60,
I know, but 60 is every 15 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So that
But to
will have,
touch answer that point, Samuel, what it does is allow those departments that dealing with statistical information.
right,
It would make it
right.
easier because if you have a record of all your citizens, then it will be better for you now to do. I guess it will be easier to do sampling, for example,
Give
if
us
you're going
social
to.
services. So yes, your things like your occupation. So that would be denoted on your profile. So for example, the other day when they were rolling out the as Julian alluded to the whole the the COVID relief, right? The government, if they had this database, could easily mine that database, and just by virtue of that
Well,
database,
Alexander, I'm going to hold it there. You have to carefully say mind that database,
yeah,
because
but
this is where fear. That's why we talk about marketing. I'm sure Jennifer, I don't need Jennifer to tell because I know Jennifer has stand up. You don't want to have a database where anybody can jump in. What you can say, there are certain general information that can be released, but you would not want any government entity. Let me finish. To just have access. What you can do, you can produce a list of names and national IDs for a government department to work with, but not for them to interact and to have that direct
yeah.
interface. I'm
That's
sure Jennifer and
but
Joan.
if you have a database, if you have a database like that, Dervan,
Vernon.
Vernon, sorry, that's how we are going to get value for money. It's being able to do things like what we wanted to do in COVID relief to say, okay, these are the persons based on occupation.
No, Alexander,
Why
Samuel,
that
hold for
person
me. It does even make it clear to It is not the database that you would need. You can get information that would have to be given you have to get permission. The moment you're going to market it, that government can have access willy-nilly, you're going to have a challenge. I'm just trying to help you. Now, if you say that information, that database can provide to another entity, as requested, but carefully say interface to the database. I'm just cautioning you.
whichever way we want to put it, but that
No,
database
no, no, no. It can't be whichever way. I expect the legal counsel at least be helping me here. But Jennifer has
That's why
because
I'm listening to him, because he's actually saying exactly what my concern is. Is
right,
that, yes, you can use it for COVID relief, Alexander. But what else will you use it for? And by whom? Who can access it? Who can ask you for information on me? I was saying to Vernon today that come January 31st, I will no longer be on WhatsApp because they're asking me to sign up to certain data and privacy that I refuse to. That is my choice. If it is that I want to use WhatsApp, I will choose to stay in. I don't. So what I'm saying is, if it is that you're going to use my data, I want to know why. Even if I sign up, I'm not saying I'm not going to sign up, I might well sign up voluntarily. But you must ensure that if you're going to use my data, it's not, oh, it's there, we can access it. That concerns me.
Could I ask Julian's, I'd like to hear Julian on this, in terms of, you have the, and Dennis, in terms of having all this information in terms of, you know, people's occupation in particular, occupation, to direct social services. Wouldn't that be a legitimate way to be able to use this database?
Well, remember, under the Data Protection Act, if you're going to, you own your data. The data that you provide on yourself, your wife, your partner, them, all of that is your data. Now, the challenge is what becomes legitimate. Is it legitimate for a political party to use the data to target voters?
No.
Okay, all right. All I'm saying is there are definitively legitimate ways that can improve public services, and there are many ways in which it can be abused. The point is you have to ensure the safeguards are in there, which is not just passing a Data Protection Act, but ensuring that the Data Protection Act is in operation, that you have an information commissioner, etc. And, you know, I made the point in the Joint Select Committee on Tuesday that I wanted it to be a commission of parliament and not a department reporting to a minister, because you will never know when somebody will come up with a bright idea about how valuable this data can be for many other reasons than legitimate ones. And that's what we want to ensure, that we have systems to safeguard against that.
Mr. Robinson, you're wrong. You say you never know, sir. I know.
Yeah, I agree
I know,
with Julian.
Mr. Robinson.
I agree with Julian on it. I mean, we have to be careful, Samuel, because you know, people will use data for various things, and you know, we have to be very, very careful about
All right,
it.
Dennis, let me give you an example. If I get, for example, 100 million US to provide data to the external source to do so and so, which would you prefer, to pay $3 million or to get that 100 million US?
If you get 100 million US, what are you saying, Vernon?
For data, I'm at the highest level, so I can get that data. And that's another, yes. Which would I take, the 100 million US or the 3 million that I'll be charged for?
The rational man would take the 100 million US.
The fool like a Vernon would probably take, would not take any. And the whole nation would call me stupid.
Yeah, right. And that's the point. I mean, I agree with Julian. You know, you have to be extremely careful about this data thing, which is why I said that it should not report to a minister. It has to report to Parliament, and you have to have some strict penalties for people at the authority who breach the duty that they have under the law.
Yeah, but for example, with the US the other day, my understanding is that they were checking social security numbers against occupation and certain other characteristics in it.
The US is not a standard to use right now, you know.
Samuel, Dennis answered you. Dennis answered you. The US is not a standard.
No,
but Dennis,
no.
we only have about 6 minutes left. I'm not going beyond 10 o'clock. But it's clear to me that whatever we've been discussing here, and you notice I stayed far as much as I've read the law myself. I wanted more in terms of coming from all of you. I have got some though in terms of, as Dennis said, where we want to go. It is not clear to the people where we want to go. And when we have decided as a people where we want to go, we need to decide, how are we going to go there? And when we decide how we're going to go there, then we have to think about the environment, the legal infrastructure, the computing environment, and the whole works. What we did was probably come up with a law, and then everything must now fit in place. And I will tell you, no thank you, no sing so.
I think one of our biggest problems in Jamaica is enforcement. If you guys remember when Elephant Man had come through the airport, what was the fine? Remember?
That was what was on the problem is that was what is what on the books, you know, Jennifer.
No, man, and I understand that, and I understand that's the point I'm making, you know. We don't update and we don't enforce. So if it was,
Jennifer, I can help you. That is why we're trying to come up brand new. It will not depend upon somebody's discretion to enforce. If you do not follow the law, it's a natural thing that
all right,
penalties will flow. So if you're going to have a law, and for example, the minister says to the head, do ABC, it means therefore the head has a responsibility to report the minister. If she doesn't, she now becomes liable. So it's not about, you need a system where if you do A, there are repercussions. We depend too much on the discretion of somebody else to.
right, and I think that's where we're going with the act in making these suggestions, is that when we look at sections 23 and 24, it says a lot of stuff of what should not be done by the authority or those in the authority. But they both end, they're very, very long, but they both end with no penalties against all of what is said should be done. And I think it's something, as I said, it's not something right now. Jennifer can sit here and say, well, I think we should make them pay $5 million or something. That's not what I can do. All I can say is it needs to be in there. The draftsmen, as well as when they go out and do these town halls and these discussions, look at what would make sense. What would be a best scenario deterrent, for example?
Let me throw what in the wheel again. The law requires that you follow the rules of the FAA, right? That's the Finance, I can't remember what it's called now. Help me, Dennis.
Financial
FAA.
Administration Act.
Right. But you ought to know that you're supposed to present your audited statements annually. You're also supposed to present quarterly audited statements. If you don't, what are the penalties?
Well, I mean, if you don't,
that sounds like a deal, well, Dennis.
If you don't present them on the stock exchange, you can get delisted, or you can.
No, I'm talking about government departments. No, government departments.
No. What a lot of people don't understand, the tax department does not require audited accounts,
No. The law requires that government departments must do quarterly, audits and must be submitted to the Auditor General. Also, they must present audited accounts annually. Now, I'm saying to you, what is there in the FAA which says that if you don't, the head will be locked up or the board will be locked up or charged $20 million, not $3 million.
There's nothing in there.
And if there's nothing in there, how is it this new act is going to refer to that act?
The truth is that if we were to
and legal course is going to tell me that I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, if you were to enforce it over,
then if I'm giving you trouble,
a lot of government places would shut down if you were to enforce it.
No, I would not.
And that's the problem, Dennis, is that again I come back to it, and again I'm not laboring the point. I've passed this. I'm saying it's not that we don't have the systems in our even this. As we come into, let's say NIDs is enforced and we get there and we're trying to push forward. My genuine worry, separate and apart from any potential human rights abuses, is my genuine worry is that the enforcement and the workings of it will be too lax. It will be too, it will not be upheld. I'm genuinely worried about that.
Yes, but Jennifer, let me help Dennis with something. Dennis said that if you have that system in place, you'd have to lock down the government departments. I tell him, no, it is the heads who'd have to pay for it, and they'll be
they're not doing nothing.
Your bags and go, Mr. Chung.
No, well, Jennifer, that is why I made the point initially that the reason why we're in the problems that we have is because we've not had a parliament that has been acting, and that comes back to your enforcement issue, because parliament is supposed to be updating the laws, they're supposed to be enforcing all of these things, and it's not happening.
No.
Well,
and that's the issue.
We have, let me see, I think we have what time we have left? 1 minute. I'm going to give each of you. And you all allowed me to talk too much,
No, you allowed yourself to talk too much, Vernon. You're not jumping Bowie.
You see how I say, to show me, my name is Vernon Derby and not Trump,
Okay, just let me give Mr. Robinson his final thoughts and then before you go. Mr. Robinson.
Julian, I think I didn't see him on,
I think he's off, Fred.
I think he's on.
He's done.
No, it's back on.
Sorry, I have to jump off. My apologies. That was a internet break, but I'll have to leave. But I'm willing to participate in future discussions like this on the subject, which I think are important.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
Julian.
All right. Okay.
Samuel?
Yeah, well, a good discussion. Obviously, there is a lot to flesh out on this matter of needs. As I said, I certainly think it should be compulsory. It doesn't seem that we're going down the road, unfortunately. But I guess we can work with what we have. I guess 200 years from now, every Jamaican will have a NIN, right? Because all of us will be gone. There'll be a new generation. So I guess it's a start, and I think it's going to help to put this country on the footing where we want, which is a digital society that increases productivity. I hear Dennis talk about this thing all the time, productivity, and that is where we need to go. It's
All
a
right.
good
Jennifer?
The good thing is, these conversations, just as an FYI, the Joint Select Committee, that's the both sides of the houses, the people who are looking at this act, they are inviting comments by Friday, January 29 in writing. And so if anybody is listening, there's an address, Vernon, I'll send it to you just in case. And so
Yes.
persons who are interested really should be sending in their concerns as it relates to the act. And as I say, it's these discussions that I think are crucial, and that's all I would require, because all it is, let the Jamaican people know what's going on.
Well, I want to thank the panelists, Jennifer Housen, Dennis Chung, thank you, Samuel Alexander, and I have to hand over. Now, I was just a guest host, so let me hand over now to your regular hosts.
There you have it, guys. Thank you, Mr. Derby, for moderating our show this evening. You were one of our guests on our last show last year, and you're the first on our first show this year. So thank you for doing us the honor of moderating our show this evening. To all our viewers and panelists, on behalf of the Irie Myrie and Friends show, or my co-host Colin Myrie, I want to wish you all a prosperous 2021. I know that we all had a rough year last year, or the majority of us had a rough year last year. And so we do hope that you will have a prosperous 2021. There you have it, guys. NIDs, to be or not to be. You heard from our panelists. We will come back with a part 2 to this show at a later date. On behalf of Colin, my co-host, and myself, I'm Dr. Coretta Mathie. Thank you, all panelists. Thank you, all viewers. Join us next week at 8 p.m. for another Irie Myrie and Friends show.